Fun story, I just recorded an entire video without pressing the record button. So here we go again. Let's just start over. Welcome to my second half of January wrap-up. I already did a first half of the January wrap-up earlier in January, and I'll link that right here. But I do have a few more books to tell you about, not as much as the first half because I had a reading slump. That's a lie. I was just being lazy. And so I didn't read as much as I would have liked, but I did enjoy what I read, which is what really matters, right? So before we go into the books, I did want to go through my reading stats from the story graph. And let's look at mood first. So it looks like my most read mood was reflective, which is interesting because in my survey for the story graph, when you first log in, you take a survey so they can recommend books to you based on your taste. And I put reflective as the books that I don't read. Clearly that was a lie, because I read 6 books that were reflective, 4 books that were informative, which makes sense because I read a lot of nonfiction, and then challenging also kind of fits into that, and then dark. I love a dark book. It looks like my pace was overall slow, which is surprising to me because I tend to equate slow books with boring, which I guess I shouldn't because clearly I enjoy it. It looks like the majority of the books were under 300 pages, which also makes sense because big books scare me. And I read more nonfiction than fiction, which is probably usually the case for me. And my top genres were politics, true crime, science, poetry, history, fantasy, biography, which makes sense. I tend to like fantasy books and real life books. And then finally, my ratings were pretty average, 3.65, which also makes sense because I had a lot of 2-star books this month and then a lot of 5-star books this month. So it makes sense that it's somewhere in the middle there. But the first book I have to tell you about since I last updated you is a book I can't stop gushing about. And that's The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is my first book by N.K. Jemisin, and I actually started this book probably twice before. I checked it out from the library, started it, probably got like 20% of the way, and then it was due at the library, and then I had to stop reading it. So I finally finished it, and it's now one of my favorite books of all time. The narrative structure is so absolutely brilliant. It literally blew my mind. I cried at the end of the book, which I rarely do, but it was just so well done and so emotional and moving, and it's just everything. And the plot twists were just like, again, blew my mind. If you are intimidated by fantasy, I would still recommend picking this book up. It does take a little bit to get into and fully understand the world, but N.K. Jemisin does such a good job at making it accessible. Her writing is very friendly, her tone is awesome, and it's not intimidating at all, like some fantasy books might be. So I really, really appreciated that. I think it brings in a whole new audience in the fantasy genre that might not pick up fantasy otherwise. But yeah, I loved everything about this. I'm currently reading the second one. I cannot wait to read all of N.K. Jemisin's work now. And please just pick this up. Just try it. Trust me. The next book I have is If I Disappear by Eliza Jane Brazier. And this is a book that came out this month. This book is a not true crime. It is a thriller that follows a person who loves true crime podcasts, and her favorite true crime podcast host goes missing, and she's obsessed with her, like in a I thought it was a creepy way. I'm like, this is not okay. But she went to go solve like what happened to this host, what happened to her. And it was very atmospheric. It was told from the main character's perspectives, but then the actual podcast transcripts were interwoven throughout, which I always find very effective in a thriller. I've read a few thrillers like that now and have enjoyed that narrative style a lot. So the setting was very creepy and moody and good. However, I really didn't like any of the characters, so I had a hard time connecting to it and really caring what was going on. So yeah, it was a fine read. It was a fun read, but I think it's a read that I'm going to forget about in a few months and look back at my reading list at the end of the year and be like, oh yeah, I read that. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, pretty average. But if you do like thrillers, if you do like true crime podcasts, I would recommend picking it up if that's your thing. The next book was very interesting, and that is From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death by Caitlin Doughty. Caitlin Doughty has a YouTube channel. She is a mortician, and her YouTube channel is all about death and and things like that, which I find very fascinating. So that's kind of how I got into her work. I had heard about her original book, Smoke Is in Your Eyes, which I have not read, but I do have it on hold at the library. This book just happened to come before that one. And now I'm really excited to read her first book as well, because this was so fascinating. She travels the world and looks at different cultures and how they look at death and how they treat death and the traditions surrounding death. And it's a really big contrast to the capitalist death industry that we have in America. And it really brings light to that issue in America, as well as kind of exposes you to different cultures and different practices that might at first have you going like, what? Ew, what? Ugh. Because it's just different than what we're used to. And she explores everything behind those traditions and practices, and is really quite beautiful. I really appreciated, I don't know, like how other cultures celebrated life through death, and how they respected life and respected nature and our connections through everything, and the importance of family and the importance of the stories that we bring into life and celebrating that in death. And I think that's something that, I don't know, I think that's something that's kind of lost right now in our society, especially in the past year with COVID and death being so normalized. And yeah, I think maybe before this book I haven't thought about, even though I read constantly about true crime and murder, I don't think about death very much. And I think this was just very refreshing, and it made me feel very, very content. So recommend picking it up. And the next book I have, I'm going to make an entire video about soon, but that is Revolting, Prostitutes, The Fight for Sex Workers' Rights by Molly Smith and Juno Mack. And this book is absolutely brilliant. It is a must read. It takes a look at criminalization of sex work around the world and the countries that criminalize sex work and why that's a problem. And then it goes into the legalization of sex work around the world, the countries that do that and why that's a problem. And then it goes into the decriminalization of sex work around the world, goes into those countries and says, well, it's better than the other ones, there's still a lot of work to do. And I highlighted so many different passages, so much to say and so much to look at in this book, but I really hope more people pick it up. It is very dense, so maybe pick up the audiobook if you are worried about it being too dense for you, because then it just kind of feels more like a podcast and you're just learning things rather than maybe reading a textbook. But I loved it. I gave it 4.75 out of 5 stars. And then I forgot to say, From Here to Eternity, I gave 4.5 stars. And my last book of the month is actually a short story. It is Girl with a Pearl Earring by Claire Rudy Foster. This is a short story that is part of a series Interlude Press is doing this month called Come What May, and this is a collection of ebooks that is coming out this month. This particular ebook is coming out on February 2nd, and it is a delightful story about friendship, about love, about how we portray ourselves to the rest of the world, how we perceive ourselves, and how sometimes when we love someone so deeply, we tend to try to be like them, and we assume things about them, and we portray ourselves as parts of them, when really it's our differences that make us beautiful together instead of what makes us the same. And like, this was all packed in a very short amount of space. I think it's like 35 pages long. Foster is one of my favorite authors, also happens to be a dear friend, but I'm so lucky to have a dear friend who's also just so freaking talented. So if you, this short story is 99 cents. It's out right now. So go check out the link in my bio below, because it's a win-win for everyone. You get to support an awesome author, you get to support a great indie press, and you get to read a great short story that's just like a warm hug on these cold winter days. So highly, highly recommend. So those are all the books that I read in the second half of January. I think in the future I might just do like overall monthly wrap-ups rather than these little ones. I don't know. I don't know if that's me being lazy or just wanting to put everything all together in one space. But yeah, I think that's what we're gonna do from now on. But let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you have any recommendations for me that you would like me to pick up and read. I'm always down for a rec. And yeah, I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye.